Hello and welcome. This is my wife Mary and I'm Ed, and we are Branch Davidian Seventh-Day Adventist. We're excited you're joining us today. We present or expound on a principle or belief related to the SDA Sabbath School Quarterly each week. This is week 12 of the third quarter. All of our videos this quarter deal with the purpose of Christ's first coming. This week we will discuss perfecting of the saints. For the last few weeks we have been talking about justification and sanctification. Today we are going to talk about the nuts and bolts of being justified. Remember, to be justified is to be made righteous.
As a review, let's go back for a minute to Romans chapter 5. We have previously discussed how righteousness and justification are paralleled in Romans chapter 5, verses 15 through 19. We also showed that the New Testament passages that use the English words justified or righteous are actually from the same root word, dikaios. In other words, justified and righteous mean the same thing. For a quick example, the Greek word dikaios is translated 41 times as righteous and 33 times as just. So let's go back and read again from Romans 5, 18 through 19. Consequently, just as the result of one trespass was condemnation for all men, so also the result of one act of righteousness was justification that brings life for all men. For just as through the disobedience of the one man the many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one man the many will be made righteous. Notice the parallels. In the first part of verse 18 we have, as the result of one trespass was condemnation for all men. Also in the first part of verse 19 we have the parallel, through the disobedience of the one man the many will be made sinners. In the second part of verse 18 we have, one act of righteousness was justification that brings life for all men. And as parallel, in verse 19, the second part says, through the obedience of one man, many will be made righteous.
So we can see that in part A of both verses, Adam's trespass parallels Adam's disobedience, resulting in condemnation, and many were made sinners. And in part B of both verses, Jesus' righteousness is paralleled with his obedience, resulting in justification, and many will be made righteous.
So justification is simply to be made righteous.
But how?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Branch Davidian prophet Trent Wilde tells us this. Justification is to be made just, righteous, right. Correction is to be righted. To be justified is to be made right, which means to give up our wrong. This necessarily includes being corrected. One could be corrected without being justified, but being justified always entails being corrected. The act of receiving correction, which constitutes being justified, is nicely summed up in Isaiah 55, especially in verse 7. It's worth reading the whole chapter. And now to read Isaiah 55:7, let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon.
There are many scriptures that teach this same thing. Here are a few of them. He who heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid.
Well, we don't want to be stupid. The ironic thing is that our carnal heart typically hates correction because it is correction that usually makes us feel stupid. But the truth is that part of learning and gaining knowledge necessarily requires unlearning. To unlearn something is to have your thinking or actions corrected.
Wow, so correction is not only necessary for justification, being made righteous, but it is necessary for education as well. Remember, true education is sanctification. To love and receive correction and to make the necessary change in our character is what justification by faith is all about.
Ellen White told us that we have many lessons to learn and many to unlearn. God and heaven alone are infallible. Those who think that they will never have to give up a cherished view, never have occasion to change an opinion, will be disappointed. As long as we hold to our ideas and opinions with determined persistency, we cannot have the unity for which Christ prayed.
That unlearning part can be very unsettling, but it is necessary. There is actually no other way to learn something new. Correction is a part of learning. It is not a bad thing. We must learn to love correction.
I love a quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson, an American astrophysicist. He said this, I love being wrong because that means, in that instant, I learned something new that day. The author of Hebrews tells us, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it." The word discipline here in the Greek is paideia, tutorage, i.e., education or training, by implication, disciplinary correction.
Look at that. A harvest of righteousness and peace through discipline. So although it is hard at first, once we see the truth of it, if we do actually love the truth, we will allow ourselves to be trained by it. Peace and righteousness will be produced in our lives and in the world.
2 Timothy says, "All Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work." So here we can see that Scripture is writings that claim to be inspired. Notice that Scripture is called God-breathed.
So inspired Scripture teaches us, rebukes us, corrects us, and trains us in righteousness. It educates us, it sanctifies us.
Another source of inspired writings that does the same thing is the Testimonies to the Church by Ellen White. The Testimonies are rebukes and counsels or corrections given to individuals in the Seventh-Day Adventist Church in Ellen White's day and are applicable for our day as well. She says, "Many now despise the faithful reproof given of God in testimony. I have been shown that some in these days have even gone so far as to burn the written words of rebuke and warning, as did the wicked king of Israel. But opposition to God's threatenings will not hinder their execution. To defy the words of the Lord spoken through his chosen instruments will only provoke his anger and eventually bring certain ruin upon the offender. Indignation often kindles in the heart of the sinner against the agent whom God chooses to deliver his reproofs. It has ever been thus, and the same spirit exists today that persecuted and imprisoned Jeremiah for obeying the word of the Lord. While men will not heed repeated warnings, they are pleased with false teachers who flatter their vanity and strengthen their iniquity, but who will fail to help them in the day of trouble." These testimonies were to purify the church and to fit a people for heaven. We should read the testimonies with the purpose in mind to examine ourselves and to see if these reproofs apply to ourselves and make the necessary changes. Ellen White says this, "The Lord is fitting a people for heaven. The defects of character, the stubborn will, the selfish idolatry, the indulgence of fault-finding, hatred, and contention provoke the wrath of God and must be put away from his commandment-keeping people. Those living in these sins are deceived and blinded by the wiles of Satan. They think that they are in the light when they are groping in darkness."
So in order to be fitted for heaven, we must have our defects corrected. This can be done in our lives by reading the testimonies to the church. Did you know that the work of the third angel's message is linked with the testimonies?
Ellen White says this, "As the end draws near and the work of giving the last warning to the world extends, it becomes more important for those who accept present truth to have a clear understanding of the nature and influence of the testimonies, which God in his providence has linked with the work of the third angel's message from its very rise." In another testimony, Ellen White admonishes us with one of her visions. She says, "In my last vision, I was shown that if you refuse reproof and correction, choose your own way, and will not be disciplined, God has no further use for you in connection with his holy work."
Ellen White gives tons of these types of instructions and warnings, as do the scriptures. But this last one we will give from Ellen White today should really show us how important correction is, for our own sakes and for the sakes of others.
This is a testimony to the Battle Creek Church in Volume 1 of the Testimonies to the Churches. She rebukes the church for their neglect of a woman named Hannah Moore, who was in need of benevolence and actually ended up dying because no one helped her. But after a very strong rebuke for the Battle Creek Church, she says this, "But let not their enemies, who are destitute of the first principle of the doctrine of Christ, take advantage of the fact that they, the Battle Creek Church, are reproved. This is evidence that they are the children of the Lord. Those who are without chastisement, says the apostle, are bastards and not sons. Let not these illegitimate children boast over the lawful sons and daughters of the Almighty."
So there you have it. Being corrected is part and parcel to the sonship and daughtership of God.
2 Thessalonians says, "The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They perish because they refused to love the truth and so be saved."
So essentially, to love correction is to love the truth and so be saved. Guys, do you see it? It's selflessness. Selflessness is at the root of understanding a love of correction. It's a love for the truth, for the best answer, for the best method. The greatest world leaders try to surround themselves with the best and brightest minds. It doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. It's selflessness. It's loving the best answer. It's boiling correction down until all that is left is advancing perfection. The principle is selflessness is a loving of correction. Ultimately, our action plan for loving all of humanity.
Not only the truth about the physical world, but about our characters as well, and how well our characters line up with physical reality, the truth. We're going to close with a quote from Branch Davidian prophet Trent Wilde. He says, "If you have not been filled with the love and zeal for the truth, and exchanged your thoughts for the thoughts of our heavenly family, then know that the lie has a hold on you. How will truth re-enter? How will reason and love take the day? Exercise your will, stretch your minds to comprehend the truth. Receive correction. Let your mind be molded according to the divine similitude."
Thank you for staying with us through the entire video. We invite you to visit our website, www.bdsda.com, to learn more about who we are and, just as important, who we are not. Please join us each week as we will continue to offer new and interesting insights for your Sabbath School studies. God bless.
Many blessings.